It was 2026, and the world was a goddamn mess. President Donald J. Trump, re-elected in a razor-thin 2024 victory that half the country still called a rigged shit show, had decided to double down on his campaign promise to make America great again. Only this time, he didn't mean just the states. He meant the whole damn continent. Meanwhile, across the pond, Europe was busy screwing itself into a corner. The EU had fractured worse than a dropped dinner plate, with Germany and France screaming at each other over energy deals while the smaller nations picked sides or tried to stay the hell out of it. Russia, smelling weakness like a shark smells blood, started flexing its muscles again, rolling tanks into the Baltics and daring anyone to do a damn thing about it. And then there was China, always watching, always waiting. Private First Class Jimmy Jack Jackson was sweating his balls off in the jungles of Honduras, wondering how the hell he'd ended up here. 2 years ago, he'd been flipping burgers in Moab, Alabama, dreaming of a girl named Darlene in a pickup truck with a new paint job. Now he was humping through the rainforest with 100 pounds of gear on his back, dodging bullets from some half-assed militia that didn't even have the decency to speak English while they tried to kill him.
God damn it, Sarge, why the hell are we even here? Ain't Honduras supposed to be our buddy or some shit?
Shut your trap, Jackson. President says we're liberating these folks from socialism or cartels or whatever the hell he's pissed about this week. Just keep your eyes peeled and your finger off the trigger till I say so.
The liberation had started back in 25, when Trump had gotten it into his head that Mexico wasn't doing enough to stop the invasion of immigrants crossing the border. Never mind that the numbers had been dropping for years. Facts didn't matter much in Washington anymore. What mattered was the optics. So Trump had sent in the Marines, figuring a quick show of force would scare the Mexican government into line. It didn't. Instead, the whole damn country erupted into chaos. The Mexican army fought back harder than anyone expected, and the cartel saw a golden opportunity to carve out their own little fiefdoms. Canada had been easier, sort of. When Trump started talking about unifying the continent under one flag, Ottawa had laughed it off as more of his usual bluster. Then the 101st Airborne dropped into Vancouver, and the laughter stopped real quick. The Canadians fought like hell, but their military was no match for the sheer size of the U.S. war machine. By mid-26, most of the country was under American administration. Central America, though, that was a whole different kind of shit show. Jimmy Jack and his platoon had been slogging through jungles and mountains for weeks, pacifying one country after another. Guatemala had fallen quick, but Honduras was proving to be a real pain in the ass. The locals didn't much care for being liberated, and they had the guns and the guts to make their feelings known.
Contact left.
Fuck this noise. I didn't sign up to die in no goddamn jungle.
In Brussels, EU diplomat Pieter van der Meer was nursing a headache that had nothing to do with the cheap vodka he'd been drinking the night before. The trouble had started when Moscow rolled into Estonia, claiming it was protecting ethnic Russians from some half-baked conspiracy about NATO bioweapons. Nobody bought the excuse, but nobody was willing to call Putin's bluff either.
God damn it, Angela. If you'd stop trying to undercut the French every 5 minutes.
And what would you suggest, Peter? That we march our armies into Tallinn and get ourselves flattened?
The truth was, Europe was a house of cards waiting to collapse. Now, with energy prices through the roof and populist governments popping up like weeds, nobody trusted anybody. Russia, meanwhile, was having a field day. Putin had figured out quick. that the West wasn't going to do shit about his little adventure in the Baltics. So he pushed further, sending volunteers into Latvia and Lithuania, while his propaganda machine churned out excuses faster than a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The quagmire was deepening by the day, and Europe was too busy shitting the bed to stop it. In Hanoi, Colonel Nguyen Van stared at the map on the wall of his command bunker and tried not to curse out loud. The Chinese were coming, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. It had started with the Spratly Islands. Again. Beijing had been claiming the whole South China Sea for years, but this time they weren't just talking. Thai Navy ships had started patrolling right up to Vietnam's territorial waters, and when a Vietnamese fishing boat got sunk, Hanoi had protested. China's response had been a middle finger in the form of a full-scale naval exercise off the coast.
They're testing us. They know the Americans are too busy playing cowboy in their own backyard to give a shit about us. And the Russians? They'll just cheer the Chinese on while they carve up the world.
Van nodded grimly. He'd seen the reports coming out of the Philippines and Malaysia. Vietnam had history with China, and not the good kind. If push came to shove, they'd fight.
Get the men ready. If the bastards want a war, we'll give them one. But I'll be damned if we go down without taking a few of them with us.
Back in the States, things weren't much better. Sarah Jenkins sat in her kitchen in Des Moines, staring at the TV as another talking head blabbered on about the glorious campaign in Central America. She wasn't buying it. Not after her brother Danny had come home in a flag-draped coffin last month.
Bullshit, all of it.
The country was tearing itself apart. Half the population thought Trump was a goddamn savior. The other half thought he was the devil incarnate. Protests had turned into riots, riots had turned into shootouts, and now there were militias popping up everywhere. Some waving the stars and stripes. Others waving whatever flag suited their particular brand of crazy. Sarah's husband, Tom, had joined one of the pro-Trump groups, saying it was their duty to protect the homeland while the military was off winning the continent. She'd begged him not to go, but he just kissed her forehead and said, "Somebody's got to stand up for what's right, babe." Now she was alone, with 2 kids to feed and a mortgage that wasn't getting any smaller. The news kept talking about victories in Mexico and Canada, but all Sarah could see was the price of gas hitting $10 a gallon and the grocery shelves getting emptier every week.
Fuck this.
She said louder this time. She didn't know who she was cursing at. Trump, the world, or just her own damn luck. But it felt good to say it. By late 2026, the world was a pressure cooker with no release valve. In North America, the U.S. had bitten off way more than it could chew. Mexico was a mess of insurgency and guerrilla warfare. Central America was a meat grinder, and Canada's resistance was proving tougher than anyone had expected. Trump kept giving speeches about total victory, but the body bags kept piling up, and even his diehard supporters were starting to grumble. In Europe, Russia had turned the Baltics into its own personal playground, and NATO was still arguing over whether to send strongly worded letters or actual troops. And in Southeast Asia, China was playing the long game and winning. Vietnam was holding out, but the rest of the region was falling into Beijing's orbit, either through coercion or outright conquest. The PLA was stretched thin, but so were its enemies, and China had the numbers to keep pushing. By 2027, The world was unrecognizable. The U.S. was still slogging through its Continental War, with no end in sight. Europe was a fractured mess, with Russia calling the shots from the sidelines. And China had carved out a new empire in Southeast Asia, all while the West was too busy imploding to notice. Jimmy Jack Jackson survived Honduras, but he lost a leg to an IED in Nicaragua a few months later. Sarah Jenkins's husband never came home, killed in a skirmish with an anti-government militia in Nebraska. Pieter van der Meer resigned in disgust after the EU collapsed entirely, and Colonel Nguyen Van Daan died defending Hanoi from a Chinese assault. And Trump? He was still in the White House, still promising victory, still saying it was all going to be beautiful, just beautiful. But even he had to know that the shitstorm he'd started wasn't going to end anytime soon. The world kept turning, but it was a darker, uglier place than it had been before. And nobody, not the soldiers, not the diplomats, said, the folks just trying to get by, could see a way out of the quagmire.
Goddamn it all to hell.